2023 is officially over. That was fast. And it's that time again for me to go over my best movies of 2023. And this was yet another year that was grim for movies in my opinion. And the usual disclaimer, I have not seen every movie that has released in 2023, so some movies may not be on this list because I have not seen them. Not yet at least. So without any further ado, let's get this top 5 list started. Number 5. Godzilla -1. It's funny, I initially didn't even plan on watching this movie in the theater, but thanks to you guys, I did. And the fact remains that this movie has stuck with me more than most of the other movies that released this year, and it's one of the handful of spectacle movies that gave me what Hollywood couldn't at a fraction of the budget. The budget for this movie was $15 million, and it does not look like it. We gave Christopher Nolan praise for being able to make a movie about the atomic bomb at a $100 million budget, and Godzilla managed to even make Oppenheimer seem expensive. Oppenheimer had one atomic bomb. Godzilla -1 had several, and they all looked amazing. There has been constant talk about this, but Godzilla -1 has forced Hollywood to reevaluate how they budget and produce movies, because they have been spending upward of $200 to $300 million plus, and their movies still look unfinished and fake. Godzilla -1 has showed Hollywood up, and it is an absolutely crushing defeat. -1 is not just a great movie, but in many ways, it's a film that has revolutionized what can be done with limited resources, not just with its special effects, but also with its great characters. And not only is it the best Godzilla film, but it's also one of the best movies of 2023. Number 4. Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse. I didn't fall head over heels for Into the Spiderverse like everyone else did at the beginning, but Across the Spiderverse, this movie gave me the reaction that the first one gave everyone else. I absolutely loved this movie. The way it takes the multiverse and utilizes it in a way that is smart and not exploitive, the way they incorporate canon into it, the character development, Miles' continuing growth, the relationship between him and his parents, the amazing action sequences, the beautiful animation. This really was a phenomenal film, and the abrupt ending, I thought I would warm up to it with a second viewing, and I did. And I warmed up to it even more with a third viewing. That being said, the only reason it didn't make it higher on this list is because it is still just half a movie. And until I see the other half, which I speculate will come out in 2028, I still cannot rank this movie as high yet. But regardless, this was undoubtedly one of the best movies of the year. Number 3. Oppenheimer. The whole Barbenheimer thing was probably the most interesting and unexpected thing to happen this year. Christopher Nolan left Warner Brothers after Tenet due to them releasing theatrical movies straight to HBO Max that year, and to get him back, they positioned Barbie's release date on the same day as Oppenheimer, which is usually Christopher Nolan's chosen release date for all his movies. What was intended to be a petty act of malice ended up being a funny trend that people ended up making an event out of, and in turn, it helped both movies perform better than they would have otherwise. Now, Tenet was the first movie where I feel Christopher Nolan lost his mind. The rules were overly complicated just for the sake of being complicated, and on top of that, the sound mixing was absolutely horrendous, and you struggled to hear a lot of the dialogue, with some being completely inaudible. But thankfully, all that bullshit was moved off to the side, and Nolan went back to the proper way of telling a story, and everything was easy to understand, you could hear every conversation, the sound mixing was done so incredibly well, and Nolan did such a good job with the pacing and unraveling of information. He took a biopic that should have many boring scenes and moments and made every minute of it so captivating to watch. After the disappointment of Tenet, this was a much needed reminder that Christopher Nolan still has it, because I was genuinely afraid that he had just lost it there, and this movie definitely earns a spot on this list. Number 2. John Wick Chapter 4. There are movies that have a lot of meaning to them like Godzilla -1 and Oppenheimer, but then there are just good old-fashioned action movies, and that's why I enjoyed John Wick Chapter 4 so much. Now, I was not looking forward to watching a 3-hour John Wick movie, especially because I was disappointed by John Wick 3, and John Wick 4 doesn't promise what John Wick 3 teases in its ending, which was very disappointing to me. But that being said, they came up with a good enough story in John Wick 4, and I had a really good time. The action scenes were amazing, albeit the least bloody out of all the movies, and the film had a great sense of pacing. This did not feel like a 3-hour movie, and that is one of the best compliments I can give it. This and Oppenheimer. Who would have thought that John Wick and Oppenheimer would have something in common? And it actually had an ending. It's great to see this series end on a high and not just spin its wheels, even though the third movie kind of did that. I even ended up loving the new characters it introduced. Donnie Yen's character was so good that I immediately wanted a spin-off movie with him, which would have been the much smarter decision than making Ballerina a spin-off with a brand new character that we have never seen before. Not the smartest choice with regards to world building, especially when you take into account that Donnie Yen had a credit scene in John Wick 4. But regardless, John Wick 4 was a great movie, and I was very satisfied when it was over. So much so that I saw it twice in theaters, and I have not done that with any other movie this year. So overall, I really enjoyed John Wick Chapter 4, and that's why it takes a top spot on this list. Now before we get to the number 1 best movie of the year, we are going to give some honorable mentions, films that could have been in the top 10 but got pushed down as more movies came out. First up, Blackberry. As an ex-technology journalist, this movie really spoke to me, and I knew about so much of the history that this movie was showing before it even happened, and I was genuinely surprised at how great this movie was. This is another biopic and talks about the rise and fall of BlackBerry, and biopics like this could be boring, but much like Oppenheimer, this was another really good one, and if it wasn't for Godzilla -1, this would have made it on my top 5 list. Next up, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Another great Mission Impossible movie, and I thought the concept of AI being the villain was fascinating. It's just a shame that the movie didn't do well, but I blame the countless lackluster blockbusters that came out before this, as this was the last summer blockbuster movie, and they had gotten a very bad reputation this year. Not to mention that a ton of disappointing blockbusters kept coming out with next to no breaks. And of course, Barbenheimer took the steam out of this movie's sales and lack of premium screens, which made people wait to see it at home. But I thought it was a great movie, and I am looking forward to seeing it again. Next is Guardians of the Galaxy 3. With the MCU's failing streak, there was no reason to be excited for this movie, because with their current track record, it would definitely have sucked if Kevin Feige and Marvel were in control of the project. Thankfully, they weren't, and James Gunn was. And he made a really good comic book movie. I wasn't into the jokey sections of the film, but whenever it was dealing with this more serious tone, that's when I thought this movie was breaking some new ground. And I loved the core heart of this movie. This film was Rocket's story, and I loved every second of his origin, and how he came to terms with his origin. And finally, Missing. This is a sequel to Searching, the movie that takes place entirely on someone's computer screen. These are essentially detective movies, and how they manage to restrict it to the screen of someone's computer is very smart and requires a lot of skill and talent. And I thought the mystery in this movie was much more intense than the first one. The only thing I didn't like was the ending, which felt very generic, and I really didn't like the payoff at all. But still, the mystery was so fun that I still think this would have taken a spot if I made a top 10 best movies list. And the number 1 movie of 2023 is Puss in Boots 2: The Last Wish. I know what you're thinking. Hey Eric, what gives? This movie came out in 2022, and you're technically right, but I live in the UK, and whereas the movie came out at the end of 2022 for you, it came out at the beginning of 2023 for me. And yeah, Puss in Boots 2 was freaking amazing. Everything from the animation, to the story, to the character arcs, the supporting characters, comic relief characters that actually had great backstories, a villain that is one of the most terrifying villains I've seen in an animated movie in a long time. It's just amazing how much Puss in Boots 2 gets everything so right. And unlike Disney, this movie didn't pander or push any kinds of politics or try to force any underage innuendo jokes. It had a heartwarming message about family, and it even provided lessons about vanity and narcissism amongst so many others. These are the kinds of quality animated movies that I expect and want to see, and it gives me so much confidence for the Shrek franchise going forward, which this movie does promise with its ending. And Puss in Boots 2 is just as good as some of the animated movies I used to watch as a kid, and it really took me back to feeling like a kid, which is one of the best compliments I can give to a movie. This really is what it's all about, folks. And whereas most movies this year have been a letdown and just downright forgettable, especially from Disney, Universal and DreamWorks really seem to be putting their best foot forward to continue making great family entertainment. And they succeeded with flying colors. And that's why Puss in Boots 2 is the best movie of 2023. And that's it for another best movies list. Thanks again for another amazing year, guys. You really are the life of the party. And my YouTube channel, my Patreon, and the live streams, they really wouldn't be anything without you. Stay tuned as I have my top worst movies list coming, and you may be surprised with some of the movies I put on there. One in particular, which I'm actually pretty nervous to show you all. And that will come out soon. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I will see all of you very soon. Take care.